We've talked about what it would look like to be a real life superhero. We've talked a lot about really practical things, toxicology or wilderness medicine from my background as an ex-military physician. But there are real people who put on capes and cowls and go out and try to do things to help other people. And today I am especially excited to introduce you here on Twitch to Impact, the leader of East Coast Guardian Group.
So the main thing my team really does is we do a lot of unhoused outreach twice a year. We do large scale handouts where we try and help 100, 120 people at a time. And then in the middle, in between those times, usually twice a month, if not every week if possible, we'll do what we call safety patrols. We go around at night, make sure people are getting home safe. We haven't really had to deal with too many bar fights or street fights like that. Being in bright colors actually takes away from that. And while we do those, we actually always bring outreach supplies with us because if we're going to be walking around anyways, we might as well be helping. Most of our team is first aid certified, and we always have at least one person, if not two, who is when we're on patrol. I like that you mentioned wilderness first aid. In college, I got wilderness first aid. I was a lifeguard. So my team really does focus on the saving aspect of the whole superhero mythos. That said, a lot of us do also have some level of self-defense training. I'm actually a martial arts instructor. We actually work with my dojo a lot.
With the kids.
I love those. I was looking at those photos today, and that was taken like in 2019, so those kids are so much older now. I looked up, my babies are grown up. We've actually gone and done talks with that karate school to discuss the ways to be safe in the street and de-escalation, which is kind of our number one thing, which actually comes from, for a lot of us, from martial arts training. They say, you know, the people who are the most apt fighters tend to be the ones who would avoid the fight the most, and I think that's true.
I actually think it's awesome that you mentioned de-escalation. A couple years ago, I had my jiu-jitsu Gracie lineage black belt instructor come on here, Calvin Cunningham, talking about what would be the best martial art for somebody who wants to be a real life superhero. And he talked about how if you would want to be able to use something in real life, a big part of it is being aware of your surroundings and space mediation, really preventative tactics, looking when he's coming to his car, is he going to walk between the two cars where it's easy for him to be pinned, or is he going to come around the other side where he has a lot of space, right? Or if he's in a crowded bar, where is he going to walk?
That plays so much into what we do, actually. When we're on patrol, if I have a backpack on with supplies, a lot of times I'll have my hands on the backpack, or if not, I'll have it like on my armor here. And the reason is, this is like your standard de-escalation pose, because this is the universal symbol for let's not fight, let's be friends, let's talk. But also, if someone wants to pick a fight, you're an inch away from all of a sudden having your hands up ready to defend yourself. So honestly, when I'm on patrol, this is like my standard pose, is my arms up here. I've been a martial artist for 23 years. I have de-escalated up times more fights than I have thrown a punch in a real situation. Being able to talk people down is, I think, one of the most important things to being a real life superhero. More than the gimmick, more than coming up with a fun name, more than preparing, more than your self-defense training or kick-ass training. I think self-defense is great, everyone should have it, but more than being ready to fight is being ready to stop a fight. I've also probably de-escalated more fights outside of the gimmick than I have in the gimmick. Because if we're being perfectly honest, fights aren't something you plan to go run into. They happen naturally, they happen impulsively. So you're more likely to just be walking around the street and see one. You know, I've seen them outside of my apartment that I've gone to stop. It was like Christmas Eve, right after midnight. I was in New Orleans, and I saw a fight break out, and I went and distracted the main aggressor, and the whole thing was able to de-escalate. And I wasn't suited up. I just was the person going, hey man, hey, you don't want to do this. And the guy looked at me, and that was all it took to break his target lock. And that happens way more often just by being aware than by being on patrol. I have a friend, Rock and Roll, who's actually done some really cool videos on de-escalation, but she always says, when you do this, you're always on patrol, which is kind of true. Like, even when you're out having fun, you should be paying attention to your surroundings, and that's how you help people. The outfit is to draw attention to what you're doing and to be a verbal deterrent. Like, my team is very big into bright colors, because when we're walking around, if someone wants to go break the car windows, they might not see a couple people walking on the other side of the street, but they're gonna see a rainbow coalition of people across the street. A lot of people, when they first start, want to wear like black and blend into the shadows. And trust, I get it. You want to be a ninja, you want to be Batman, you want to jump out and save somebody. The idea of wanting to save someone sounds really noble, but it's also hoping that you run into someone having like the worst day of their life, right? Like, if you're trying to save someone from getting mugged, you're hoping that someone gets mugged. Instead of surprising the mugger and stopping it mid-thing, if you're there visibly and it stops it from happening, that's better to me, like, because maybe it doesn't happen.
I think it's a really interesting theory to talk about. We tend to talk here about the kind of ethos of the everyday superhero, right? Trying to figure out what it is you need for your job, right?
Yeah.
And we did homeless outreach in Puerto Rico, wearing some kind of something. For us, it was just a t-shirt. Wearing something actually kept the people around us safe, because drug lords would actually admit to not wanting to shoot someone while we were there so that there wouldn't be trouble. And they would actually wait until we left to kill people. That's a thing that actually happened. We actually had, after our group left, they waited to kill the person that they'd been talking to. So sometimes being visible and like having an identity is very important. Other times, depending on what your purpose is, I think if I were to go down into the local indigenous community with a outfit, it wouldn't maybe go over. You mentioned armor. Do you wear a bulletproof vest? I know I used to.
Currently, my gimmick is not bulletproof. I've thought about it, and I haven't ruled it out. It's not necessarily needed for what I'm doing. There's a lot of people that want to go out and they want to find the most crime-ridden part of their city.
And then get in trouble themselves, and then the police have a problem, and then it's a big mess, and then everybody has a bad day.
Exactly, and I get the idea. I want to go take down the gangs. I want to stop the gangs. Well, first you have to look out why are the gangs? Gangs aren't necessarily something because people are like, I want to go commit crimes because it's fun. It's, I'm going to join a gang because my community is unsafe, and I'm not going to come in as an outsider and be like, screw you, I'm kicking your butts. Number one. Number two, even if you wore bulletproof armor head to toe, you're not going to wage a one-man war, because we're not Batman. Batman has the superpower of being a story. I would love to be able to say I stamped out all the crime in my city, but there's a whole reason that police have a whole department, and it's hard to be everywhere at once. Most of us are on foot. None of us have a Batmobile. I mean, you might have a car, but you're still dealing with traffic. None of us are flying in the plane overhead or web swinging from building to building, as far as I'm aware. So it's really hard to get around in a big area like that. I'm not going to do any good if I walk into a really crime-ridden area and say, I'm here to help y'all, because it's just going to piss people off. Let's say I take on a couple gang members and I win. I beat them up in a fight. What's the next step? I tie them up, I drop them off to the police, and then with no evidence, and then they go free for getting assaulted? Even if I deliver evidence, what then?
It's difficult also to address the underlying things that cause crime, right?
That's actually why we focus on outreach. The one thing I hear a lot with giving stuff to the unhoused is, well, they're just going to use that for drugs. But statistically, most people that are unhoused and use drugs because they're unhoused. They're not unhoused because they use drugs. A lot of people have the correlation causation backwards. Because think about your daily life. Like, you have books, TV, video games, computers, work, whatever. You have a million things to keep you active, to keep your brain going throughout the day. Imagine you're in the middle of a city where no one looks at you, people don't think of you as anything more than a scourge, and you have nothing to keep your mind entertained. Getting high on heroin actually would sound pretty appealing at that point. My team has no illusions about what we do. We don't think like us giving out care packages is going to get these people a new home, but it might help them get to the next day with an outreach group. So to go back to the bulletproof thing, like, for us, it's just not needed where we're at. There are teams I know where people do wear it, and it's very necessary. And if I was in an area where shootings were more common, especially in the areas where we're trying to help people, I'd 100% be bulletproof. The armor that I do wear is padded out. It is meant for, no pun intended, impacts. Essentially a melee fight. If someone wants to take a swing at me, or if, hopefully not, multiple people want to take a swing at me, it's meant to kind of even the odds. It's not meant to make me a walking Hulk. Whenever I give advice to people who want to do this, I always say, everything I tell you is my opinion. But I also like to ask people, when's the last time you were walking down the street and you saw a random crime? Not because you were looking for it, but you saw it. Unless you're really going into like the places you probably should not be dressing up in a fun outfit for, you're probably not going to run into a ton of stuff. The idea is to be ready when you come upon it, but not to assume that your every night is going to be, the Green Arrow punching drug dealers out.
If violence really solved the problem, then having very violent police departments would solve the problem, and we wouldn't have the most crime in the big cities in the country where you have the most violent police departments, like in New York and Chicago and those other places. In Puerto Rico, a number of the people that we worked with did say they started heroin before becoming homeless, but even if somebody did start drugs before becoming homeless, what is the thing that caused them to start drugs? What is the thing that made heroin accessible? What was the thing that made that a reasonable option for their misery, their depression, for their mental health situation? What is it that caused that to happen? It's kind of the division between Bruce Wayne and Batman. In some ways, Bruce Wayne can do more good because he can fund things that deal with the underlying causes. So I really like what your friend says about kind of making it a lifestyle and always being ready and kind of having that thought process of going towards a problem instead of running away from it. So what got you started in this kind of journey?
So there's kind of two answers. So the overall one is I've always been very passionate about helping people. My mom told me, you don't remember this, but when you were like 4 or 5, it was raining one day. You looked out the window and you said, what happens to the homeless people when it rains? And so according to my mom, I've been kind of like angling this way all my life. I grew up doing volunteer work. My parents really instilled that in me. And then, so funnily enough, probably like more than about 10 years ago, I came across websites, real life superhero projects. It was like movie quality posters of real life superheroes, including a fellow named Good Samaritan and Mr. Extreme. Mr. Extreme, leader of the Extreme Justice League that we talk about. For Good Samaritan, one of my partners down here in Florida. And a guy named Old Superhero was also down here in Florida. I thought, oh, that's really cool. And just kind of like didn't think about it. And about 2 years later, I was on a joke website, like Reddit style. And I had been watching like Arrow and Daredevil, and I posted a joke something along the lines of like, sometimes I think I could like go out and be a superhero. You know, I know martial arts, I know first aid, I can help people. And then I remember bullets exist. And someone commented a link, right? I thought it was about these guys. It was that same real life superhero project. And I went, oh shit, I saw this 2 years ago. And that kind of made me be like, all right, you know what? Screw it. Let's look at the logistics. And I realized I could go out and do something. My first armor was a baseball catcher's chest plate, which sounds funny, but
it works.
Yeah, hit one of those things.
It's made for blunt force trauma.
Exactly. And then I actually here, hold on one second.
Makes sense.
This is after I painted it up. Like Rich, I had like a spray painted eye in the middle of it. But yeah, that was my original thing. You know, I just had like a do-rag on. I basically had like the ninja style mask. And Durham police, after like 3 weeks of doing it, came out to me and said, hey, you can't be walking around like this. We have mask laws in the state. And I said, well, what about just like the top and the goggles? He said, yeah, that's fine. So at first I literally just cut a bandana out with the eye holes and had the goggles over it. And then I had a friend make my first official mask, and then I ended up upgrading it to this fancy one with all the gray highlights through it.
Funny, the mask laws issue, we don't have that issue anymore, because now if anyone questions you wearing a mask, it's my COVID mask.
Right? It was a few years too early. I had a perfect excuse. So I joked that I did it because I got called out for a joke. But it was something I've always wanted to do. I mean, not who does it, but a lot of people want to be superheroes. And I suddenly had an opportunity. I'm like, yeah, why not?
Well, and this is something we talk about a lot on this channel, is you moved away from the impossible question to the logistics, to the how. And that's what changes everything, right? Because then it's, well, what would it take to make this happen? Which is the same kind of thing we try to tell people when we're talking about what would be your real life superhero project, regardless of whether or not you're going to put a mask or something on, something that would be uncommon, completely different good, that would change your life, and that seems impossible to you right now. What would it be, right? And try to break things down, have people think about, okay, what would be the first thing you would need to actually make that happen? The dream of dreams that you have, that if you had an imaginary world where you were a superhero, what you would do. And essentially that's your story, is you go from the possible, impossible, the what, to the how, which is pretty cool. So why have you always wanted to do this instead of some other form of charity?
Yeah, so a lot of my formative years were involved in charity. I've worked at camps for kids with disabilities, camp for kids with cancer. My dad and my brother are both pediatricians. My mom and sister are both school social workers. We come from a very help people kind of family. As for why this instead of something else, honestly, because when I thought about doing it, it sounded fun. A lot of real life superheroes don't talk about that part. They say, oh, I'm doing this because I need to. I have this need to go help you. It's like, okay, you don't need to wear the gimmick. You're doing it because it's fun, and that's okay. I'm giving everyone listening who wants to be a superhero, it is okay to admit that it's fun to do. I don't have to wear this. I enjoy it. It's fun. And you know what? I don't have to be like, yeah, I'm a superhero. But you know what is really fun to say? Guys, I'm a motherfucking superhero. Like, my fiance, she worked in a place where there's like one of her indirect bosses was kind of typical greedy corporate guy. And she joked he was Lex Luthor. And she's like, you want a new nemesis? And I'm like, yes, I do. Can I go fight him now? Like, we make jokes about it. I mentioned a friend of mine, Good Samaritan, who's down here. Like, whenever we'd have like this event, we'd look at each other and go, Civil War! Like, you know, Captain America, Iron Man. So it's fun to kind of be a superhero. the thing you got to remember is you got to be realistic. You can't say you're a superhero and then and I've met every type of person I'm about to say. You can't try and convince everyone you got superpowers. You probably shouldn't go telling everyone that you took on 15 gang members at a time last night and you do it all the time. You put 150 people away in jail and you just kick so much ass and that the police use you as their investigative tool. We've all heard it. None of us believe it without evidence. Like if you want to pull out the news article about it, we'll talk. But
yeah, I think that's the thing that also turns people off from the idea of especially dressing up, because when you're drawing attention to yourself, there is an aspect of it like, does the person have a narcissistic personality disorder? Is the person delusional, right? Because it attracts those kind of personalities as well, which is why I liked the justification that you mentioned that, hey, being in bright colors makes it that people don't want to fight as much because they can see that people are there. Do people ever make fun?
Because it's calming.
Oh, that's cool.
It's calming and it's considered authoritative. I mean, people think of blue as police, which was not my intention, but it is considered calming. Blue light is considered a calming color. Honestly, in another universe, I was going to be dark red. They just didn't have that color at the store.
It is considered a more aggressive or warning color.
Like a year or two ago, someone did like when Marvel What If came out. Someone's like, "What is their RLSH What If?" And I wrote a whole What If story. Like if I went red, I'd actually be escalating fights and I became a supervillain. That was like the What If story fan fiction I wrote. It was very silly.
It's fun to be a little silly sometimes.
And you mentioned like narcissistic personalities, and so one thing that you get a lot with people who do this, everyone's like, I'm not doing this for fame, I'm not doing this for love. And like, that's fine. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not trying to get famous, but it is fun to come out and do your show also. Like, I'm not doing it for it, but it's a fun bonus. And also, you have to have a level, like, maybe not ego. You don't have to necessarily be self-absorbed, but you have to have an ego to do this because you're literally going out to attract attention to yourself, and you're literally putting on a costume saying, I'm gonna go help the world be better. It takes confidence to do that, and confidence comes with ego. It should be a healthy ego. You know, you shouldn't be like, I'm going to save the world and fuck everyone who says I'm not, and then just start punching people. Or be like, me giving an unhoused person a granola bar and socks literally saved their life. It did. It helped them. Be proud of that, but don't build it up too much. So there's you got to balance it.
You know, the mission versus not the mission. That's where the hero complex problem arises, right? Where if it becomes, it's all about me and how cool I am, that's when you start making the really bad mistakes that can get someone hurt, that can get someone killed. We call it in medicine, we call it being the cowboy. But if it's, I'm doing this for the mission, I'm putting out these colors because it's going to have this effect. It's going to bring joy to people. It's going to make people laugh. It's going to make me laugh. It's going to make people happy. It's going to do this thing. If you have a goal in mind, then the confidence serves the goal anyway.
Exactly.
Right. So then it works.
Yeah, and we have our fair share of cowboys. I know a ton of people like that. I'm not gonna name drop or call people out, but I know a ton of people like that. And honestly, most of them don't last long. Once in a while, you get someone who sticks around for 4 or 5 years who still is a cowboy, and everyone just rolls their eyes at them. So there is like a whole online community. A lot of it's on Facebook. There's some on Instagram, usually on both. And especially over the past few years, the community's become very self-selective. We've been trying to weed out bad actors. It's not to say that we're trying to gatekeep, because we do want to let new people in. We do want to mentor people. If you're going to come with an assault rifle and say that you're going to come stop crime, and be like, this might not be for you, bro. I've had a lot of people come and say, hey, I want to fight crime. And then I give them a lot of questions. Usually like, what do you mean? What's your goal? Do you want to literally, is your goal to actually fight them? Have you thought about doing this instead? Have you thought about doing volunteer work instead? And how receptive people are is a very important indicator for their character. Not that I think people have to listen to me because I don't know everything, but how receptive people are to listening in general is very important. And how receptive they are to something other than, I'm going to go punch a supervillain.
I think the cringiest video I ever saw on this topic was some guy who went and started bothering a guy who was taking marijuana and might have shared marijuana with someone else. And he started being like, I'm a superhero, this is a crime. And like,
did he have a megaphone?
No, not a megaphone. It was some kid who was martial arts trained. He looked good, but what he was doing was threatening probably a poor person. It was clearly a privileged white male who was messing with like this thin, kind of malnutritioned looking black guy, possibly who was selling marijuana. And it was like, yeah, is this helpful? I'm a sexual assault medical forensic examiner, right? To me, there's so much worse stuff going on in the world than is someone taking marijuana and you're gonna go beat someone.
Right?
So it becomes very cringy. So I can see where you would want to gatekeep. We have gates for a reason. Gates are good. We make gates to keep the sheep safe and to protect our stuff.
And honestly, before I started, stopping drugs was a big thing. I started 2015, still kind of in the end of the drugs are bad era. And you definitely had a lot of people who would call people out for selling drugs. And I'm not here to say drugs are good, you should go do meth or whatever. And I'm going to caveat this with there's a difference when kids are involved versus not. If someone really wants to buy meth, because it's how they get through the day, and again, I don't think it's a good thing, is me screaming at them that they shouldn't really help them. Unless I'm prepared to like take them to a rehab facility and sponsor them and everything beyond that point. There's a lot of people who want to go and stop these crimes that are crimes, but if you stop that drug dealer, it's just pissing off one dude that might get you shot later. If you are spying on prostitutes and reporting them, it's not the Johns who get in trouble, it's not the pimps who get in trouble, it's the working, usually women, who get in trouble. And is that actually going to save them? Or is it just going to put them in jail and then they're back on it?
With human trafficking, it gets a little complicated because if you have a well-trained law enforcement contact who understands your various kinds of protective visas, and you have an area where you're going to be able to get the pimps or the Johns in trouble, then that's a different situation. There are SWAT teams actually in Cambodia where they have ex-military guys will get in with the pimps and take them down, right? And stuff like that, that is fantastic because even in places where prostitution is legalized, actually, in general, the women don't have the power in the situation. They've done plenty of studies that demonstrate, even though everyone thinks that it's going to be great to legalize, actually, in reality, what people do is then they just sell kids in the back alleys of these legal places. So it becomes a huge issue, and it's definitely something that still needs to be taken down, but how do you do it intelligently and in a way that you're not hero complexing in, you're figuring out, how do I make sure I get the bad guys in trouble and not the victims? Exactly.
That's it. Like my team has had a discussion about this before because someone that we worked with was like, hey, I want to go stake this place out. He looked at me, he's like, you have to wear your gimmick, you wear blue. I'm like, I wouldn't wear that. I would never wear the color blue if we were doing something like that, first of all. Like, you don't wear anything identifying. But second of all, it's like, you don't have a contact with the police. And I've seen this person do it. He took photos, but the photos didn't say anything. They didn't show anything. It was just one of those things where, like you said, unless you have the contact with the police, unless you have the ability to really get the information where it needs to go, you're more likely to hurt the victims. And
you have to get embedded in the community too.
And
so here I have a police contact specifically for that because it's a concern in the indigenous community, but nobody is going to report and none of the victims are going to speak up if they aren't empowered themselves. So then you get to the problem of how do you educate, and it becomes a whole other issue, a simpler issue, and one that I want to ask you about actually, because you mentioned you do bar safety patrols. What do you guys do? Because I mean, I'm assuming when you do bar safety patrols, part of it isn't just fighting people who are starting fights, but I mean, bars are a great place for people to get roofied and for the first step of an assault to occur. What do you guys do? Are there any safety tips or any like eyes out that you guys do as far as that goes in your bar patrols?
That one's kind of trickier because that's one of those things where I mentioned before, you got to see it to be able to do anything. We rarely go into an establishment unless we're invited in. Like, if someone's going, it's usually not me because I have the most gear on generally. A lot of it's watching who's coming out. If someone is half slumped over, we'll start asking questions. We'll keep an eye on people. I mean, obviously, it's hard to be like, if you see a guy carrying a girl slumped out, we'll ask questions like, hey, are you okay? Does she need a ride home? Do you know her? And a lot of times we'll see people passed out. We'll try and either wake them up. If their phone's out, we'll see if their buddies are nearby. I've had to call the ambulance before and just give a statement. Awesome. So that's always the last resort if they're just passed out, as long as they're still breathing and moving. But if they're not super responsive, we're going to call. We've seen people looking for cars, and we try to intercept and be like, maybe you should take a cab and come back. We're not going to physically stop someone because, I mean, that's a level of vigilantism that I'm not prepared to do, is start beating people up because I think they're wrong. I remember early on, one night I ran into someone who was just slumped over on the side of the building. I woke him up, and he literally could not string words together. He was like, that's literally what he sounded like. And it took him a little bit to actually put together that I was dressed up. And all of a sudden he goes, huh? What? Huh? And he and I took a selfie on his phone, so I still wonder when he woke up the next day what it looked like. But I got him into a cab. I was able to get him into a cab. I was able to text his friend from his phone. And his friend sent an address, and I showed the cab, be like, hey, this is where this guy's going. And hopefully he woke up with a fun photo on his phone.
That's awesome. Well, that's a big deal because you prevent a lot of people getting things stolen, or people who are unconscious or vulnerable. That's
totally.
A big deal. Do you have any last advice on how people can start or safety tips for this kind of thing?
I do want to say one quick thing, just to go back to roofing and stuff. Keep an eye on your drink. Or if you got to go to the bathroom, you don't want to take it, put a coaster on it, put it shit to the bartender, ask them to keep an eye on it. Leave it with a friend. Take it with you. please don't leave your drinks unattended. That's a real way to get hurt. But as for stuff like getting started, so on Facebook, we have a group called the Real RLSH Recruit Welcome Center. There's going to be a couple like questions. Please actually answer them, because I'm one of the people who reads through it. And if it's just like none of it's answered, we'll send you a bunch of reminders to do it. But there's a lot of advice in there. There's a podcast. For a while, we were doing it like once a month. It's been a couple months since we've done it, but it's called Heroes 101. I'm one of the hosts of it. It's actually now a YouTube show / podcast. But there's a ton of really good advice in there. It's been going on since before I've been doing this. But the simplest way to break down is, what is a way you can help your community? Like, what's a realistic issue in your community that you can realistically help? If the problem is gun violence, don't say you're going to stop all the criminals. If the problem is you've got a lot of people who are hungry on the street, there's a step. If you've got a lot of litter, if there's a lot of trash in your neighborhood, that's actually something you can help with. That is something you can visually see your impact on. So find a realistic problem and start there. The costume, the gimmick, the name, the identity is secondary. Going out and figuring out what you can do to help is the main thing.
That sounds like very good advice. Hey, thanks so much for being on.
Like I said, I could talk forever. I love it. When we do podcasts, we used to schedule them for an hour and they go for 90 minutes. And then afterwards, the other host and I would talk for an hour and a half. And I have to go sleep at like 2 a.m. Terrible.
Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, I'm very impressed by the conversation about avoiding vigilantism and understanding other people's autonomy and kind of thinking more, right, about it, which is so wonderful, because it's so much the antithesis of like that crazy guy who went and punched a drug person for no apparent reason. So well, I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts.
Of course. I mean, the way I view that, and honestly, this is something I used to say a lot and I kind of forgot about when you asked about why I started. One of the things I always think about is, if not for luck, anyone out there could be me, right? Like I was lucky I was born to a family that I've now twice been laid off. Both times I had some people to fall back on, other people don't have that. So without luck, that could be me. So it's my duty to give back. And in the same vein, I'm not going to go telling people what to do, because how would I like it if someone came up to me, if I'm drinking a beer and slapped out of my hand and said, you're hurting yourself? That pissed me off. Why would I do that to someone else? If I don't like it, why would I do it to them? Why would they like it? And that's kind of how I view a lot. I mean, obviously, with some stuff that doesn't matter anymore. If someone's assaulting someone else, it doesn't matter.
Or if someone has a gun to their head, right? You're not going to be like, oh, it's, I get it.
But like for stuff, I'm not going to take someone's autonomy just because it makes me feel better.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you again so much. It's been a
my
great
pleasure.
Conversation.
And I look forward to having more conversations. If anybody wants, my Instagram is